So, for the viewers who may not recognize you, could you let them know who you are, where you're from, and definitely what do you do?
Okay. I'm Howard Gardner. I'm speaking from Cambridge, Massachusetts, near Boston. Um, a interesting biographical fact is that I'm 81 years old and I was born in Scranton, Pennsylvania, and that gives me two features in common with President Biden because he's also 81 and also comes from Scranton. We don't know each other, and I have no particular license for him one way or the other, but it's a way of slotting me. Um, I moved from Pennsylvania to Boston 64 years ago to attend university, Harvard University College, and I've been at Harvard ever since. Uh, so I'm a lifer. Um, Harvard is, I always say, may not be the best school in the United States, but it's the best one in the world because everybody's heard of Harvard. Uh, Recently, a lot of things have come out about Harvard which don't improve its reputation, but I'm way below that zone. Uh, I was a student, then a doctoral student, then a researcher, then a teacher, and now while I've retired from teaching, which is appropriate at my age, I still conduct research at a place called Project Zero, where I've been for 57 years. Project Zero develops ideas in education and tries to give them a push in the right direction. We don't run schools or universities or camps, but we hope that people will find our ideas useful um, and will put them to work. And if anybody wants to know more about Project Zero, you should just go to Google or some other uh, web uh, and just say PZ or Project Zero at Harvard, and you'll find out as much as you want to know. So, does that give you a sense of who I am and what I'm about?
Yes, indeed. That's very inspiring. I mean, like you say, you in the 80s and you still going, you still making history, you still planting some mighty seeds. And also as well, Harvard is the most, world renowned place of education, so that says a lot. And I really appreciate everything that you're doing. Now I have to ask you this. When did you develop this passion for psychology and education? Is this something you wanted to do since you were a child? Or did you kind of get into it later in life?
Well, I'm glad that you're asking that question because it actually helps me think about my life in a different way. Um, as I said, I grew up in Scranton, Pennsylvania. My parents did not have a higher education, but I liked school, and I thought that I would become a teacher anywhere from kindergarten, preschool, all the way through high school. I didn't even know there was such a thing as college or university because I was a kid growing up in a town where most people didn't go to higher education. Um, but I had an uncle who was more scholarly than my parents. And when I was 16 years old, so when I was a teenager, he gave me a textbook in psychology. I don't think I'd ever heard the word psychology. And I leafed through the textbook and I discovered something which was very important for me. I'm colorblind. That means I can't see colors. Um, and as I was leafing through the textbook, I noticed that there was a plate on the Ishihara test. The Ishihara is a test which eye doctors give you or doctors give you to see whether you can see colors. And if you and your audience can see colors, you can say, oh, that's 23 or that's 49 or it's 24. But all I see is a bunch of dots because I can't see that the numbers are in a different color than the rest of the background. So I said, my goodness, there's a field of study. It's called psychology, and it might actually help me understand my mind and the mind of other people. So I would say that by the time I finished secondary school, high school, I already had education and mind on my radar screen. But in truth, when I went to college, I thought I would study history because that was a field that I learned about and was interested in. But then there was a new field called social relations. The name is meaningless, but it was a mixture of all the social sciences. That is psychology, sociology, anthropology, with a bit of economics thrown in, bit of political science. And I said, this is what I'm really interested in. I want to understand the world of people, but I want to understand the world of people as we live in the world. And it matters whether you live in Madagascar or whether you live in Kenya or whether you live in South Africa or whether you live in France or whether you live in China, Japan, Korea, Syria, you name it. Um, so I really am a product not of education or psychology specifically, but of an interest in the broader social sciences. But right after I finished university, this is 1965, so it's basically 60 years ago. Um, I got a summer job working with a psychologist who was developing curricula for students in middle school. Those are students in fourth, fifth, and sixth grade, so 9, 10, 11 years of age. And that curriculum, which was a study of human nature, what makes human beings human, how do they become that way, how do we become that way, and importantly, how can we become more human? And by more human, I mean the good aspects of human, lots of aspects of human beings that aren't so good. And even though working on this project in 1965, 60 years ago, sort of went into the background for a while because when you do your doctoral work, you have to focus quite specifically on things. Um, it's remained in my consciousness. And now, as I think about the 21st century and the many ways in which education will change, the very fact that you and I can be on different continents with an ocean between us on a Monday, it's a little bit earlier for me than it is for you, and can have a conversation. And if there was a smart machine recording this conversation, it could probably predict your next question and my answer as well as we could. Education can't be the same way it was in Scranton, Pennsylvania in 1950. So I always have a foot in knowledge and history and scholarship, but I'm also trying to keep awake about what's going on in the world.
Wow. Okay. Okay. I really appreciate you breaking that down. Now I can add this in if it's okay. By you being in education for so many years, you've been doing this longer than a lot of people have been alive. Have the technological advancements, the introduction of AI, is that something? Is it helping people become more educated, or is it the opposite from your perspective?
The answer is yes and yes. um, it is easier than ever before to be connected to a good course at a good college or university, um, and to take a course for a fraction of what it would cost if you were actually at the college or university. And if you have a little money, you can have a person to read your papers and grade you and give you feedback in what you're doing. So these are things my grandparents, who were born in the end of the 19th century, could not even have imagined. However, there are a couple things which make it more complicated. One thing is why, while almost everybody in the world now, I think in Africa, elsewhere, has access to some kind of a smart device like this, um, uh, it's not used primarily for education. It's used for gambling, for entertainment, for mischief. It's very bad for young girls, particularly because they get very hung up on what they look like, and if they aren't as beautiful as um, the girl in their class, or as who is the Taylor Swift, if they're not as beautiful as Taylor Swift, they feel very bad, and probably for boys too, if they're not as good soccer players, as good, you know, marksmen, be able to shoot as well as somebody else, they can feel bad. So the potential of education in our century is greater than ever before. But not only you can't force people to take a course from MIT in computer science just because it's available. Uh, it's also the case, and this is a much more difficult question. Um, when we have smart machines that can read and calculate much better than we can, should we be learning those things, or should we rely on what the machines can do, and instead try to do human related things like What does it mean to be a good person? What does it mean to be an ethical person? What happens when we're in a planet where climate change could destroy life as we know it, where nuclear weapons could destroy life as we know it? Um, uh, my own educational um, recommendation would be it's less important for everybody to learn calculus or learn to read a foreign language or to speak a foreign language, and more important to learn to be moral and ethical people. And that, in a way, takes us back to religion, which is thousands of years old, but also to what it means to live in a modern society where we are citizens and most of us have a chance to be informed. In any kind of a democratic society, we have a chance to vote, and that means we have some say on who the leadership is. And from my own frame of mind, I think learning to be a good citizen in the 21st century is better and more important than mastering a curriculum which my parents or your great grandparents would have had to master if they went to a school in the end of the 19th century.
Wow. Okay. Okay. I really appreciate your perspective, from the psychology and the educational standpoint, because no matter who I interview, if it's a musician, if it's an actor, if it's an engineer, if it's somebody that's into medicine, everybody has this perspective on AI. Sometimes it's, people are all for it, and then some people are struggling to, make that adjustment. Let me see. Okay. Now I wanted to ask you about this. If you could speak on the theory of multiple intelligences and what is your role in that?
Sure. If I'm known anywhere except in psychology or education classes, it would be for the theory of multiple intelligences. Um, that was developed over 40 years ago. I developed it with help, but it was basically my theory for better or worse. And it's a critique, a criticism of the notion that there's a single thing called intelligence, and there's a test called the intelligence test or the IQ test. And if you take that test and do well, you're smart, which means you can do well in everything. If you get an average score, then you're average and you'll be average in everything. And if you don't do well, and it isn't because you were sick, but because you couldn't answer the questions, then you're not going to be able to do well in everything. So it's basically an argument, the standard test, that we have a computer in here. And if the computer is a good computer, we succeed at everything. If it's a bad computer, we fail at everything. If it's in between, we're okay. Um, my theory, I'll give you the up-to-date version, but it's basically not very changed from 1983, is our mind and our brain is better described as having 7 or 8 different computers. One computer deals with language, another with mathematics and logic, another with music, another with spatial, finding a way around small and wide spaces, another with bodily kinesthetic, gymnastics, exercise, dance, navigating, and so on. Um, Interpersonal, which is what we're doing now, trying to understand other people. Intrapersonal, trying to understand yourself. And what I call the naturalist intelligence, which is the ability to make consequential distinctions in the world between one animal and another, one plant and another, one product and another. And there may be more intelligences, but the basic argument is that we have a bunch of different computers, and the fact that I know that you're good with music tells me nothing about whether you're good with spatial or with understanding yourself. Those are separate intelligences. Psychologists, by and large, don't like the theory because they like the idea of a single test called the IQ test. I can ask you 10 questions and say, oh, you're smart, you're average, you're dumb. But the rest of the world already accepts, less because of my own work than because of the work of another psychologist, Daniel Goleman, who 10 years after I wrote my book, developed the idea of emotional intelligence, sometimes called EQ. And almost everybody now accepts the idea that being smart emotionally doesn't mean you're going to be good in school or bad in school. Those are two different kinds of intelligence. The difference between Goleman and me, and it's not a deep one, but it's an important one, is I think every intelligence can be used benignly or malignantly. So if you have language intelligence, you can use it to write poems, but you can also use it to write propaganda to create hatred. Um, Similarly, if you have uh, interpersonal intelligence, understanding at other people, you can use it to help people in need, or you can use it to torture them. Um, uh, as we're speaking, uh, the leader of Syria has just been overthrown, Assad. His family's been there running the country for 51 years. And people say, oh, great, he was a tyrant and he's gone to Russia, where they welcomed him. But nobody has any idea what's going to happen in Syria a, a month later or a year later. And that's a question of what people's intelligence is used for. There could be people there who try to make it a less punitive country. The Assad family murdered hundreds of thousands of people, but there could be people who are every bit as doctrinaire and crazy and who are just going to murder other people. And Madagascar's history is unusual, but you could say the same thing about many countries in Africa and elsewhere. Uh, be careful what you wish for, because you may not have liked President Biden, but when you're the man from Scranton, but the odds are out on what Mr. Trump is going to be like. And as I'm talking, the governments in France, England, Germany, other so-called NATO or Western countries are all in turmoil. Ukraine is a land war. South Korea, last week, the president called martial law. There's not a book with the right answers. And this is where education and psychology are very important. We can help people think better about the choices that they are faced with and how to make better choices. You ask about multiple intelligences, and I said that's what I'm best known for. And all over the world, people have multiple intelligences schools. In fact, there's a man whom you might know, I don't know, who came to see me a month or two ago. He comes from Scotland. He's a football player, but he has millions of dollars behind him, I think, due to Richard Branson from Virgin Airlines, to make multiple intelligences measures for Africa, so we can find out not just who's going to be good in a typical IQ school, but who'll be good in schools which value other kinds of abilities like the ones I'm talking about. So multiple intelligence is kind of, if there's a obituary for me, it's going to say Gardner, multiple intelligences. But my work over the last 30 years has been on what we call good work and good citizenship. And in any country which has any degree of political freedom, there is some sense of people being a citizen. In Rome, people weren't really citizens because there was just one emperor after another. But in most countries now, they call themselves democracy, and we have a notion of what it is to be a citizen. And everybody who isn't independently wealthy has to work or be on welfare. But if you are a citizen or a worker, you could be a very bad citizen. You could be interested only in yourself. You could vote for people who are your cronies. You could favor legislation that helps you, but not other people who are less fortunate than you. And similarly, if you're a worker, you could work only for yourself. You could steal and cheat, or you could be a reasonable worker, or you could try to be a good worker, which is to say, how can I make the workplace a better place? We don't know each other. In fact, I have to admit, I don't know how to pronounce your first name. How do you pronounce it?
Okay, it's Taye, like you tying your shoe. Taye.
Okay, very good. Now you have some power because you do a podcast and it's seen by people. You have a decision about who to invite onto your podcast. You could invite people who are very wealthy, but their money is coming from very bad sources. You could invite people who are very manipulative, influencers who just want you to buy their product, even though it's probably not good for you and might be dangerous. Or you could say, look, here's somebody who's been working in Bangladesh, and this person has really been trying to help people um, use their money in a way that's good for the community. And maybe if I bring this person on, like Muhammad Yanis, and I give him some screen time, I could help people to become better and better citizens. I am under no illusion, I have no notion whatsoever that what I myself say and do today and over the 81 years of my life is going to make any difference. But I know that if enough people try to help others become good worker and good citizen, it will make a difference. Um, and so that's why I read a lot of newspapers every day, and that's why I can talk a bit about South Korea and Greece and what's happening in uh, um, Angola or Kenya or Sudan. Because I think if we live in the world where we can get that information, we should try to understand it. And if we can contribute in some way, we should do so.
Yes, indeed. I definitely agree. I'm a world traveler. I've been to about 70 countries, 20 African countries, and it's definitely a beautiful thing to have a global perspective. It's so much going on in the world. So I
Well,
could
thank you.
ask you, yeah, yeah. Now, I would like to ask you about some of your more recent work. If you could talk about the Essential Howard Gardner on education and the Essential Howard Gardner on mind.
Okay, well, for those people who are watching rather than listening, uh, this is one book. It's called The Essential Howard Gardner on Mind. We've been talking mostly about that, but there's another book uh, called The Essential Howard Gardner on Education. The cover was made by my son Jay. I look a little bit younger and better there. And when you reach my age, I've written over 30 books and over 1,000 articles. That's what I do. I'm a scholar and writer and reader. No one is going to read all those things. My late mother did put them on display in her house, but she didn't read them either. But I had the chance to put together 25 or 30 of my articles about the mind and 25 or 30 articles about education. And then I forgot this, but my wife reminded me, and it's important. It isn't just a collection of my papers, it's a story. Because before each paper, I talk about what gave me this idea, what excited me, what was I unsure about, and if I were to rewrite this paper again today, how would I do it differently? And in the education book, one of the last essays is advice to young researchers, what I think, how I think they should go about learning about the world. And the last essay in the Mind book is called Had I World Enough and Time? And that's a line from poetry, but it really was if I could live longer, and I'm not going to live much longer, what are the kinds of things that I would want my students and my readers to do? So the book is not only a collection of Gardner work, good and bad, but it's also a story of how I came up with this work. And it's a letter to the future about what I think people should be studying and how I think they should be studying it. Um, and one thing we joke about now, and probably you've heard this kind of joke too, is we have machines now, especially large language instruments, ChatGPT, which are very, very good at thinking and writing in the way that human beings do, because they can process billions of bits of information. So I think I joke in the book that maybe even after I die, if you want to say, what does Gardner have to say about Taye and his program? You feed that question to the large language instrument, and they'll come up with something that's kind of reasonable, probably better than I would come up with if I were senile, but maybe not as good as if I had all my wits. So we live at a very incredible time. In some sense, it's the end of the human era. And I don't mean that judgmentally, but we come out of Africa. The first Homo sapiens were there several million years ago. The first, first of the hominids were there several million years ago. Homo sapiens, if we're there, three or four, maybe 30 or 40,000 years ago. And in the last 5,000 years, Homo sapiens has just taken over the planet. maybe even the globe. I mean, maybe even the universe. We don't know. That's not true anymore. Um, this is, in a sense, this is the end of the human dominant um, uh, era. I forget whether I sent this to you, Taye, but we posted a month or so ago uh, an article called "Who Owns Intelligence?" Um, and it begins with what you and I were talking about, namely, how did the intelligence test get developed so we could just have one sense of intelligence, give you a test, and say how smart you are. And then I challenged intelligences with multiple intelligences. Dan Goleman challenged intelligences with emotional intelligence. But then um, in this long essay, which I wrote with Shinri Furuzawa and Annie Tshishura, we talk not only about human intelligence, but about animal intelligence, plant intelligence, and artificial intelligence. Because intelligence isn't just a way of talking about you and me and the other 8 billion people on the planet. There are also animals that can do some things better than us, many things as well as we can, some things differently, but who can say whether it's better or worse? And there's some things they can't do. They can't have a conversation, as far as we know, like you and I are having. So that's animals. Plants is a bigger stretch, but we now know that when there's something dangerous in the environment, a plant can signal other plants, and the other plants will fold and move in a different direction. We didn't know this except by folklore until 10 or 20 years ago. And when I was a student, the word artificial intelligence didn't even exist. It was created in 1956 at a meeting at a university. And I wrote a book about um, AI and other um, studies of the mind called um, The Mind's New Science. This came out in the 1980s. And I talked about artificial intelligence there. But that was like artificial intelligence was just beginning to creep and crawl. It was like an 8-month-old infant. Now, just about everything that human beings can do, uh, uh, AI can do as well or better. So we can't just say intelligence is something that we as people have. We need to have a much broader way of thinking about intelligence. And just to give you a punchline, at the end of that essay, I talk about what I think makes something an intelligence and what I think doesn't count as an intelligence. And there are certain things like the kind of communication system that you and I have, which animals and plants don't have. But I talk about why would one want to call an AI system, an artificial intelligence system, smart the way we call human beings smart? And the answer I come up with is um, artificial intelligence does better on all of the multiple intelligences than we do, with two question marks. One is intrapersonal intelligence. What does it mean for an AI machine to talk about itself? I mean, I don't know how old you are. I don't know where you were born. I don't know what enabled you to travel to 70 countries. Nobody else watching you has gone to 70 countries. That's your story. Uh, and if you have a psychiatrist or you have a minister, you can share that story. What would it mean for an AI system to have intelligence about itself? I don't know what that would mean. And the other thing, which most people would think of if they thought about, is what does it mean to be conscious? I mean, I got up this morning. I forgot to take my medicine. I had a pain in my back. My wife and I took a walk, and that's all part of our consciousness. And she said, "Can I go out to see my friend now, or do you need me to help with the headphone?" And I said, "I think I'm okay." That's my consciousness, and I'm sure you have your consciousness isn't the same, but not only are you conscious, but you're self-conscious. I can reflect about the fact that I didn't remember to take my medicine this morning. I don't know what it would mean for a computer algorithm to have that kind of understanding itself. It makes no sense to me. It's like a category era. So that's what I'm working on uh, with my research staff now. And it's another way of carrying on my work after I die, because Annie just finished college. She's probably a third of my age. But if she's interested in this question of plant intelligence and I drop dead tomorrow, she can still continue it. Um,
Wow, wow, that's really amazing. I appreciate you breaking that down. I wanted to, if you have time, I wanted to ask you a little bit about some of the chapters. Do you have some time?
Sure.
Okay, okay. Now you talked about creativity and the Chinese key. If you could speak on that a little bit.
Okay, well, I'm not as much of a world traveler as you, though I've been to quite a few countries. But in 1980, I had the chance to go with the first delegation from Harvard to China after the Cultural Revolution. The Cultural Revolution was this incredibly disruptive period in China from 1960 to 1980, where Mao Zedong kind of went nuts and began to kill many people and really tried to destroy Chinese history. I mean, he wasn't all bad, but he was very bad at the end of his life. So um, I became very interested in China and education in China, and I made several trips to China in the 1980s, the last one with my wife and our then very young son. Um, and I studied the Chinese educational system, particularly arts education, because we haven't talked about this until now, but I've been very interested in arts education. I'm basically a musical artist type, and my wife is a visual artist, but also we both are interested in language, literary. So we began to go to Chinese schools, um, and we saw that the kids as young as 5 or 6 were incredibly good drawers. You know, the teacher would say, "Draw a fish in a fishbowl," and at the end of the period, the kids would all make very good uh, um, images which looked very much like fish in fishbowl, or draw a, a flower, or draw a panda. And we were very impressed. And we said, these kids are really good artists. Then we learned, and that was a less happy thing to learn, is this their drawing skills are done by learning to do it step by step in the same way you would program a computer. So there's absolutely no chance that you would make any wrong moves, basically just copying without any kind of understanding. Um, so we said, well, we don't like that kind of educational system because we want kids to be more imaginative and to draw things that they want to draw in ways they want to draw it. But then we did something which was my idea. It was clever with our son, who was, as I say, young then. We had a stroller to push him around. This was a stroller that was made in America, and it was a stroller that nobody in China had seen. So we said to the teachers, um, we want the kids to draw this stroller because there was no way that the kids could have been learned to do this. The teachers said, no, no, you can't do it, bad. And they were very, very controlling, the way any teacher would be when there was somebody from abroad who was studying them. But we insisted, I said, we used a very Chinese thing. We said, our sponsors said we have to do this, kind of like if we said Mao Zedong or Xi Jinping said we have to do it. So they had to do it. And the surprise, Taye, was that a number of the kids were extremely good. They were much, much better at drawing it than we expected. So they really were able to look at that stroller and to produce a good, we would call simulacrum, a good copy of it, even though they hadn't learned how to do it. So this really complexified my thinking. And I wrote a book called To Open Minds, Chinese Clues to the Dilemma of American Education. But because, as I said earlier, nobody wants to read all my books, there's a chapter in the, I think it's in the education book, I can check, which talks about what I learned in Chinese schools. Let me see. Yeah. Um, And basically, this is the takeaway. And I apologize for the long sleeve roll up, but the takeaway is you need to teach kids how to do things carefully and well and modeling it. But you also have to give kids a chance to explore. And here's the key notion: it doesn't matter which you do first, it matters that you don't neglect the other. The problem in American schools at that time, less now, but that's a conversation for another podcast, was that we gave kids too much freedom and not enough discipline. So they could draw crazy things which nobody's seen before, But if they said, well, draw what things look like out of your school, they would have had no idea. In China, the kids could learn to do anything step by step. But if you said, now, here's a stroller, draw it, some of the kids would not have known where to start. They would have been afraid. Their teachers would have been afraid. Their parents would have been afraid. So that's one of 25. It's one of 50 articles, 25 in the education book, 25 in the mind book, where I try to say what I've learned in my. It's now at least 70 years of thinking about education, because we talked about myself as a child. I forgot to mention I also taught piano for 10 years. I was a piano teacher. Not very good, but not terrible. And many decades of trying to do research about the human mind in a very expansive way. I studied creativity, leadership, ethics, not just whether people can do well on an IQ test. That doesn't interest me.
Wow, wow. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you. I apologize we went a little bit over the time, but the information that you was, sharing with me has been phenomenal, and I'm sure the viewers will definitely learn a lot from watching this, and they will go check out the book as well. Now, where can they get the book from? Do you have a website, or should they just
Yes,
go ahead and Google?
if you go to
Okay.
my website, but you can go to Amazon, Google, you can go to Teachers College Press. If you want, I will send you what you can say. But anybody who wants the book can get it. It's not a collector's item.
Okay. One day it will be, I'm sure. So like I say, I really appreciate the work that you're doing, and I definitely look forward to the work that you have coming in the future as well.
Me or my students. Okay.
Definitely.
Okay. Good luck.
All right. So I'll edit it, and the episode should be ready after the holidays, maybe sometime in 2025.
Okay. Well, I hope so. But otherwise, Syria will probably have had 3 revolutions since. It's not funny. It's tragic. But we live in a very volatile world. As I say, I think Madagascar has been more protected than many other societies, but I'm sure you've had a turbulent history as well.
Yeah, definitely. I'm from America. I'm from Cleveland, Ohio. So I'm
Oh,
just moving and grooving.
oh, I'm sorry, I didn't understand that. Okay, so you're in Madagascar not because you're living there now, but just because you happen to be there.
Well, that's my goal is to live in Madagascar. So I've been going to different countries to try to see a place that's kind of peaceful, laid back, good weather, low cost of living, low violent crime, low gun violence. You know what I'm saying? Like you say, it's not a lot going on.
Okay, so all right, so I wasn't entirely wrong. So,
Right.
did you stay in Cleveland or did you move around in the United States?
Well, I was born and raised in Cleveland, and then as an adult, I began to travel. So I studied abroad in the Caribbean. I studied abroad in South America. I lived in Ghana for a year. I was in South Africa for a year. I've been to Europe. Just trying to see as much as I could before I narrow it down. Because some places are so expensive. They're nice places, but it's like the cost of living is so high.
Just one more question. Have you got kids?
No, not yet, not yet.
Okay, well, that's a big decision.
Yeah. Hopefully in the future, once I settle down, get the house together and the land and all of that.
Okay, well, I have 4 kids and 5 grandchildren.
Wow, that's amazing. That's amazing. That's inspiring. I really appreciate what you're doing.
Okay. All right. Well, very good to see you.